Grazie mille, grazie. Welcome to another edition of American Racing Snobs. You know who we are. Eric Morse, Tony Rizzuti with you. The Italians go 2 for 2 in the last Grand Prix. They win their home Grand Prix. It wasn't the guy we thought it would be, but Charles Leclerc bringing it home for the Tifosi. There is right in the world again.
You feel at peace, Tony?
You
happy?
Hey, look,
I asked you on Sunday, does this save your season? If you were going to pick one race for Ferrari to win, it would be this one, though, right?
Yes.
The entire calendar. This trumps Monaco. This trumps anywhere else for you, at least, correct?
Absolutely, and I think it trumps that for every Ferrari fan. This was the race. I think one of the folks that followed us on the live stream, and for those of you that watched the race with us, thank you. That was a lot of fun, close to 2,000 people. Decided to pull up a second screen and kind of watch with the snobs and comment. I think one person said in there, Ferrari specifically built this car to win this race. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I think they put a lot of attention on this race.
Yeah, it was certainly their consolation prize once their season started falling apart after how many Mercedes 1-2 finishes to start the season.
No doubt.
You pretty much knew that the Constructors' Championship was out the window, the Drivers' Championship out the window for Ferrari. So what else do you have to lose besides try to win your home Grand Prix? They hadn't done it since 2010 with Fernando Alonso.
It's amazing. And now Charles Leclerc has solidified himself as a Ferrari legend. You win that race in that car, and you are legend in the Ferrari world.
And Mercedes threw the kitchen sink at him. It's not like he went out and walked that race. Mercedes still has fantastic pace, even if the track doesn't
I think they have more than maybe we thought they did, Eric. Would you agree with that? I mean, he was right there. It took everything Charles Leclerc had and a little bit of elbow room.
He got a little cheeky.
He did get a little cheeky.
He was on the very edge of acceptable for me, and I'm a little biased towards Hamilton at this point. Hamilton had to bail off to keep from crashing. Charles didn't really leave him room. Mm-hmm. There was almost contact. I think if Hamilton's not thinking about the championship in the back of his mind, there is the potential for a crash right there. I think Leclerc knows that, and he took it right to the very limit. Now, here's my hot take on that. Hamilton, if he does pass him, I'm still not convinced he wins that race because of the life of the tires for Lewis Hamilton and the age of those tires. Remember, Ferrari changed Leclerc to the hards, the white-sided tires, whereas Lewis was on the mediums, and he had huge blisters. Now, some of that comes from having to follow Leclerc as closely as he did for as long as he did, but I'm still not convinced that Hamilton wouldn't have fallen off a cliff before the end of the race, even if he had gotten by Leclerc into that second chicane.
Yeah, I think if Leclerc could have stayed within DRS zone, that Ferrari engine plus DRS,
plus the age of the tires.
With Mercedes not having any, he probably could have blown right back by, but that would have been a lot of fun, right? The back and forth between the straights.
It was still fun.
It was. The race had, look, we're not going to do our traditional complete breakdown because you watched the race with us. Most of you did, so you kind of know.
And you can replay that, right? Is that on our YouTube page?
It's on YouTube. It's on Facebook. You can watch it
Motor
again.
Racing Network on YouTube. We've got our own channel there, and just look for the Snobs video from Sunday. That was a heck of a good time.
Yeah, you could sync it back up if you still have the race on your DVR, if you can find it online somewhere. Check that out. So we're not going to do a full breakdown, but let's talk about Charles Leclerc. He defends himself that, hey, I know I was racing right on the limit intentionally, and I was going to make it very difficult for him to pass. Lewis Hamilton came, or Toto Wolff, let's start with Toto. Toto came off and said, I think that's too far. I think the way he was driving is too far. Lewis came out and said, if that's how we're going to race, fine, but I'm going to change how I race too. Because
you drive others the way you get driven, and Leclerc just set the precedent with Hamilton of this is how we're going to race each other. I think Lewis is pretty fair with most people, and he's fortunate that at this stage in his career, he doesn't have to defend tooth and nail that frequently. It's not like 2016 where him and Nico Rosberg were nip and tuck nearly every single weekend. This isn't something that Hamilton necessarily needs to get into, but he's certainly going to remember that defense that Leclerc put up and go, hey, if I have the chance to take a couple inches away from you in the future, he's going to do it now. And no more benefit of the doubt for Leclerc.
Yeah, and he says it's obvious the FIA isn't going to step in and do anything about it until somebody crashes. Yeah. They're going to let him race, which I'm fine with. Let's just start with Charles Leclerc, right? we've seen him defend in a few different races now. Do you consider Charles Leclerc a dirty driver? Do you now view him as a guy that's gonna do something that's against the rules or push the rules? Because I don't see him that way. I think he races people really hard. I think he probably gets the elbows out a little wider than they should be. But I haven't seen him just take somebody. There are guys that when they race you hard, that means they're basically going to put you in the fence.
I think he's forceful. I don't think he's dirty. You think back a couple of years, the way Schumacher used to race. Even when he came back, he ran, I think it was Rubens Barrichello's Williams, all the way basically touching the pit wall when Barrichello was clearly faster than the Mercedes of Schumacher. I think that Michael has crossed that line many times. You and I had a great conversation with David Hobbs about Ayrton Senna crossing that line on offense and on defense. I don't think Leclerc is anywhere near that category. I think of him more as, you remember Mark Webber? He was kind of like the Mike Wallace of F1 before he had a race-winning car.
Wow.
Before he had a race-winning car, Mike Wallace has a reputation of being, Kevin Harvick once told me, Mike Wallace is the hardest driver to pass in NASCAR every 25 laps.
I would have bet my house there would have never been a Mike Wallace reference on American Racing Snobs, and I would have just lost everything.
But when Mark Webber was driving for Red Bull, remember he was there before the good old days of when they had race-winning cars for a few years, and he would get lapped, and he would put up a hell of a fight. Leclerc is fighting for a race win. And remember, he's only got 2 victories. They came the last 2 weeks. He had heartbreak in Bahrain, and he was defending for his life in Austria from Max Verstappen, trying to hang on to that race victory. He was able to do it for a couple laps before Verstappen got the better of him. I think it's been fair but forceful. You know who else has been forceful? Alex Albon with his overtaking. Even though that pass on Carlos Sainz didn't stick, because Sainz was able to come back at him in the other half of the chicane, I love the attitude that Albon is showing. He's got that killer instinct that I think Gasly might have been lacking.
Yeah, that was exactly right. Christian Horner said those are moves that Gasly would have never made for whatever reason. Whether he was trying to make sure he didn't wreck the car, even though he basically destroyed one in Germany, that's what he wasn't doing. And that's what Alex Albon is doing. I think it's interesting. If I'd have told you at the beginning of the year that the big rivalry that would come to fruition and be what we talk about was going to be Charles Leclerc versus Lewis Hamilton, I don't think either of us would have saw that. I don't know that we would have said it wouldn't happen, but I don't think that's where we thought the Mercedes-Ferrari rivalry would be here as we close in on the end of the season.
You know what? As soon as they announced Leclerc last summer, this is what I was hoping for.
Really? To battle with Lewis Hamilton?
Yeah, because we were thinking that Ferrari was going to put a better car underneath him. Now, once we saw the way Mercedes came out of the gate, I don't think we expected it this year. But last year when they said, we're going to take Kimi Räikkönen out of the car and put Charles Leclerc in it, this is what I was hoping for.
Yeah, well, you got it.
I didn't expect it based on what we saw earlier, but there have been cracks in this Vettel facade before. Oof. And that's another whole conversation that I'm sure we'll have in just a few minutes here. But just remember that Sebastian Vettel won 4 consecutive championships with Mark Webber as his teammate. As soon as Danny Ricciardo came in, he absolutely took his lunch money.
Yep.
Sebastian Vettel did not lead a lap in 2014 in a Red Bull that won 3 times with Danny Ricciardo starting outside of the top 5 in each of those victories. So there's a precedent for a young teammate heaping pressure on Vettel and Vettel not being able to answer the bell.
Some could argue he's been flawed ever since.
Do you want to go down the Vettel rabbit hole right now?
We can go down any hole we want to today.
Phrasing?
This is a little bit.
Are we not doing phrasing anymore?
It's a little bit different show today. Yeah, let's go. Let's just go.
Sebastian Vettel has a big problem. It's obvious. Mm-hmm. Does his reputation ever recover from what we've seen in the last calendar year plus? Because let's say best case scenario, you're a huge Sebastian Vettel fan. What's the best case scenario? He gets his head right. He recovers. Ferrari puts a good car together, and he wins a world championship for Ferrari. That's the rose-colored glasses daydream of any Sebastian Vettel fan right now. Does that change his reputation? Even if he does that.
Yes.
Because
another championship changes his reputation.
Likelihood of that happening, though.
Right now, I don't see him staying. Look, he's 3 points away from being sat down in a race. He's got 9
Penalty
points against his license, and we're going to Singapore.
And you can get penalty points for speeding on pit road. You can get penalty points for virtual safety car infractions.
I mean, he's got to be so careful, unless he just doesn't give a flip.
And you know what really bothers me?
And then if he gets sat down, not to interrupt you, then it gets really crazy. Because who goes in the car?
They're not ready to call somebody up.
The last I heard, based on where they sit right now, if that were to happen, the rumor in the garage is they would have to move Giovinazzi into the Ferrari for one race because you've got Ericsson sitting there who could easily get into the Alpha and pick right up. Could you imagine? When was the last time there was an Italian in a Ferrari?
Giancarlo Fisichella.
When was that?
2009 after Felipe Massa's head injury.
10 years.
Luca Badoer also drove that car for 2 races, failed to score points. He was the longtime test driver and had a super disappointing stint.
I wouldn't want to have to go the next 3 races with 3 penalty points sitting there looming over whether I race or not. If he were to lose his license for a race, to me, that would fall right in line to this spiral we're watching. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Almost like it's, for whatever reason, the racing gods have decided it's not your year, and by it's not your year, it's a really bad year.
So let's talk about the incident.
I hope that doesn't happen.
He's running in 4th after Hamilton and Bottas had a pretty feisty exchange going into the first chicane on the first lap. Leclerc defends. Vettel's riding in the 4th spot, and it looks like he's going to be able to not threaten for the win, but he was going to be a valuable piece of Ferrari's toolkit to fight Mercedes.
Huge part
and
of it.
by spinning out of the 4th position on lap 5 in an unforced error by himself at the Ascari Variante, then the boneheaded move of rejoining, you know what he said about it afterwards? He said he couldn't see. So, Tony, when we leave the parking lot here after the show's done, if there's something blocking you and you can't see, you're just going to fire it in there, right?
No.
It's lap 5. The whole field is coming.
His excuse was shit.
Yeah.
I couldn't get going. I spun a little bit in the grass. I can't see because we have this higher cockpit now in the halo. I don't want to get rid of that, but I'm just saying we can't see.
So then play it safe. Lose another couple spots. He just pulled right into the traffic.
That's the 3rd time he and Stroll have had contact.
That should not be happening.
If you'll remember.
And he ruined Stroll's race.
Where were we that Stroll got into him? He was lapping Stroll, and he got nailed in the side.
Was that this year in the Pink Panther, or was that last year in the Williams?
This was when he was with Williams, I believe. He got hit, and then they made contact. Sebastian's hit him twice, and Stroll's hit him once. So by my scorecard, Stroll owes him another one.
And Stroll, who was it he pulled into? Was it Kvyat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your comment you made the other day? It's like
hurt people hurt people.
Yeah. Cautions breed cautions.
Yeah, you get knocked off the track by someone rejoining in an unsafe manner. So what do? Rejoin in an unsafe manner and get the next guy.
But at least he's seeing red at that point, right? He's not of the sane mind because he's now ticked off and he does want to get his race back going. It's just Sebastian just throwing it away with either with pressure or no pressure. But I think to transition a little bit, because we can beat him up forever. Certainly the Italian press is doing that.
Yeah, they don't need our help.
In Ferrari's last 2 victories, haven't we kind of also seen their weakness? Right? They've got to trim the car out to almost no downforce and use all their top-end speed on all the big, long straights to even have a chance to stay ahead of a Mercedes, and they burn their tires up in doing so. I mean, you can argue Vettel just lost it, but there's no downforce on that car at all. Now, I guess the other way to look at it was Charles Leclerc was being pressured by one of the greatest ever, probably top 3 in some people's mind.
Yeah.
Top 5 for sure. Greatest drivers
top 5.
ever at the top of his career. Like, this is peak Lewis Hamilton, and he didn't spin the car.
Nope.
Vettel was by himself. He didn't have traffic in front of him that was taking air. Like, he was sitting in that little pocket about a second and a half behind and about, a second and a half back, like his own little pocket, and just lost it.
Do you know what Charles Leclerc's salary is for this season?
More than yours and I?
Yes.
No, I don't.
Charles is making $3.5 million to drive for Scuderia Ferrari this year.
All right, we're not too far off yours.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're close.
TV boy.
Do you know what Sebastian Vettel is making?
It's got to be in the 15-20s, isn't it?
$45 million to get comprehensively outclassed. This can't keep happening. And I said this during our live stream. I'm not a Ferrari fan. I'm not particularly a Vettel fan. I like to see Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes win these races. I'm enjoying the hell out of watching this historic run, and I know not everybody is, because I probably wouldn't have been too happy during the Schumacher dominance. But as a Mercedes fan, I take no pleasure in this anymore. You know, when Seb had his mess up that handed Lewis Hamilton an unlikely championship, and what was that, 2 years ago when they had that start line crash at Singapore when Lewis looked like he was down and out and they were trading blows in the championship fight, and it swung the entire season to Lewis Hamilton. I was like, okay, Vettel messed up. This is pretty cool. Hamilton's going to get this. It's not like that anymore. This is bad. It's not fun to watch.
No, we'd rather be watching Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton battling it out week after week. Who's going to get the best each week? Every Formula One fan would want that regardless of who you're a fan of. Let's see the two, quotes, air quotes, best go at it. Every race, that would be classic. That's not what we're getting. And as great as Charles Leclerc has been in 4 races, right? Mm-hmm. Austria, Bahrain, and these last 2, this Ferrari cannot compete with the Mercedes, and I think the rest of the way, maybe Austin, it's got some long stretches where they can stretch the leg a little. With this new engine that Red Bull has, assuming Max can keep any kind of power into it, which is a big ask because he lost power 3 times last weekend at Monza.
Well, he complains about losing power like Lewis complains about his tires.
You've got a Red Bull car that's probably going to be the closest to compete with a Mercedes over the next few races.
Who do you think gets a championship first, Max Verstappen or Charles Leclerc?
I don't know. I can't answer that at this point, and that's pretty sad because coming into this year, it was clear there were 2 cars that were really good. And then there was Red Bull that has a really nice car and probably the best car in the twisty bits, but has a Honda engine. It's got a GP2 engine in it. How can it compete? Well, they've competed just fine, haven't they?
Yep, they've adjusted. So the last Ferrari Drivers' Championship was 2007, Kimi Räikkönen. Their last Constructors' Championship, 2008.
And that's why I'm saying if Vettel were to get his shit right next year and win a 5th championship, I think all is forgotten. It was just some weird thing.
1.5 long glitch.
Yeah, it was just this weird transfer of Binotto coming in and, whatever.
You want to talk about qualifying?
God, do we even need to?
What a mess.
Will we see it again, though? I don't think so.
I think those were unique to here in Spa. Just like the Ferrari having a chance to win, it's unique to these special tracks.
Yeah, I don't think everybody's going to queue up at Singapore.
No, that's the exact opposite of what you want to see. But it's the same problem we had in NASCAR, and NASCAR actually did away with multi-car qualifying because of that problem, with the exception of road courses. Because at Auto Club, everyone... they were having, as Crofty kept saying, the Mexican standoff. No one wants to go first and be the only guy without a toe. So they're all just queuing up, and then as soon as someone goes, they take off like startled cats chasing him, trying to get the toe.
Do you think, though, because now we kind of know what that distance is, right? They say they want around 4 to 5 seconds. If you're within 4 to 5 seconds of another car, you get enough of a toe down the straightaways, but it doesn't cause the air to be all weird when you get into the corner. Could Austin be a place where we'd see him queue up like that? Because a 4-second gap, you've got the main straightaway that's pretty long. You've got the back straightaway that's kind of long. You wouldn't want it through the S's, but if you've got a 4-second gap, you might be able to get a little toe in those 3 different.
I think there's too many twisty
you've been
bits.
there.
I've
been there for IMSA. I haven't been there for Formula One.
Yeah, going down the hill, there's the Beckett's Maggots copy and then the Suzuka S's copy that Herman Tilke instituted in designing that track. I think you need too much downforce. I mean, even Spa, you have that second sector that kind of equalizes the cars that aren't super great in a straight line but have the downforce. I think Austin, there's just enough to make it so you still would rather have a Mercedes. Now, if you get a Ferrari on a better race strategy, that creates some opportunities because the tires can cancel out that downforce advantage, and the straight line's always going to be there for overtaking at least. But I don't think that there's a single track, unless the Mercedes doesn't seem to be allergic to Singapore anymore, because remember, that was their bogey track. We'll see if it's super hot, then maybe that could open up an opportunity for a Red Bull or a Ferrari weekend. But right now, I wouldn't be surprised if Mercedes ran the table.
Yep. Hey, let's take a quick early break. We come back, we'll cover a couple more of the stories in there. I want to talk a little bit about Renault and some of the other stuff going on. We got a Morse code report, so we'll take a quick break. Be right back here on American Racing Snobs. We are back. Thanks for joining us here on American Racing Snobs. I'm Tony Rizzuti, joined by Eric Morse as always. Eric, we've kind of covered the big stories that came out of Monza as far as up front, but how about the Renaults? Danny Ricciardo with a strong run after the race coming across. I guess they had pizza when they were in Italy, so they said the pizza's really working for you, and he went, pizza, pizza, pizza. How about those Renaults? They turned up the engine. They look strong.
I have to first say I told you so. And secondly, I didn't really base that on any particular knowledge. So I was a little bit lucky in picking Danny Rick as my midfield MVP. He was also a little bit lucky in getting that virtual safety car for his pit stop, pitting a lap later than Hülkenberg. Isn't that weird that they pitted Hülkenberg, who was behind Ricciardo in fifth place? They pitted him a lap before for the undercut.
Yeah, your wife was real pleased at that.
Yeah, she was like, they always screw Danny on strategy. Could you imagine how she would have been if they had pitted him in the reverse order that we would have expected?
Yeah.
And Hülkenberg would have gotten that virtual safety car? Because it kicked Ricciardo like 12 seconds up the road. He was having a race of his own after that virtual safety car. So incredible speed. By far their best race of the season. Fourth place for Danny Rick, fifth place for Nico Hülkenberg. They're still well behind McLaren, but now they're kind of in a race of their own ahead of the rest of the midfield. They put Racing Point, Toro Rosso, Alfa Romeo, and, of course, Haas, and now Williams bringing up the rear. But this was a really positive weekend for the boys in yellow. Still nowhere near fighting for the top three, but you get those top three taking each other out, it could create an opportunity for a bogey podium for one of these guys, and Renault was in position if something were to happen with Hamilton and Leclerc, or if Bottas had a mechanical or anything like that. They were there ready to pounce, albeit 30 seconds down the road. Still a free pit stop for Lewis Hamilton to get fastest lap. But, hey, the Renaults, they're beating the cars that they had to beat, but was it a fluke?
No, I don't think it was a fluke. I think they're gaining on it. Now, Monza was the first race for their new Spec C engine, and it obviously showed some promise there.
Was it a fluke that McLaren wasn't able to fight Renault for the top of the midfield because of the nature of this track?
Probably.
I think we'll probably see McLaren.
But I think that gap between McLaren and Red Bull and Renault, which I thought was quite a bit, I think it could be tooth and nail the rest of the time.
McLaren does have a pretty heady advantage, and that is for some big money at the end of the season, because the constructors' points are the only things that
I don't know that they catch them in constructors, but I think that gap between those two cars, I think we're going to see more dicey racing between those two, which is going to be great, right? The midfield's been just fantastic all season long.
It sure has.
Let's review our picks, by the way. Eric, you did have Danny Rick as your midfield MVP. I had Sergio Perez. You got the advantage there, but Perez
seventh.
Had a great run after what was sketchy practice. I mean, he hit just about everything. He was like Kimi. Speaking of Kimi was my bogey. Wasn't a great race for Kimi, but it was
a crap weekend for Kimi, having the two wrecks, and then he started the race on the wrong tires and then didn't have the car to recover after taking that penalty from starting from the pit lane. Had to do a 10-second stop go. That's a 30-second penalty.
How do you make that mistake?
They didn't read the rule book closely enough. They thought that since they were going to a pit lane start after Kimi's crash in Q3, that they could go with whatever tires they wanted.
He also didn't have his wheel. his wheel didn't work. They needed a spare wheel, and somebody on the YouTubes put together a whole collection of all the times he didn't have his wheel. Someone go get my wheel. I need my gloves and tell that guy, gloves and wheel.
That was last year at Monaco, right, in the Ferrari?
It's happened like 4 times. They showed 4 different times, but apparently his wheel didn't work. They had to grab the spare wheel as they were pushing him out there. You had Albon as your bogey, so a nice little bogey there. Not too bad. And then, kind of where it goes wrong, I had Leclerc and you had Vettel.
Yeah, I was really thinking that Vettel was going to rise to this occasion, and instead he stumbled again. No need to kick the man while he's down. But, yeah, Charles Leclerc.
Hey,
nice pick on your part right there.
Real quick, let's talk about Bottas a little bit. Re-signs the contract. He knows he's going to be there next year. Toto Wolff came out this week and said, for whatever reason, Bottas seems to have a problem when he's following cars.
He is not able to attack the way Lewis Hamilton is. And is that a knock on Bottas, or is that a compliment to Lewis? Because Lewis, he is just a bulldog. When you see that silver arrow in the mirror with 44 on it coming in your side view mirror, you know you've got a fight, and it's going to be relentless. And Leclerc was able to hold him off this time. But when Bottas is behind, you just don't get the feeling that surge is coming. And I don't know if it has to do with his driving style, if he's just not comfortable in the dirty air that Lewis is. But all season long, don't you get that feeling if someone's chasing Max or one of the red cars, and if it's Bottas, you're like, he'll catch him, but he may not do anything with him. Same thing at the end of this race. When Bottas had the fresher tires, he closed in on Hamilton, but it took a Hamilton mistake to give Bottas second place, and then he really didn't have anything for Leclerc, whereas Hamilton was just throwing haymakers trying to knock him off his game.
It's interesting when Bottas needs to come up with a big race, is I think he needed to do 2 or 3 before the summer break to kind of solidify his deal to stay at Mercedes. He came up with them. But when he's sitting there comfortable, he's just kind of that guy. Just kind of that other guy. It's a really interesting thing how he seems to, when the pressure's on, he can take it to the next level, but when it's not, he's just kind of there. It's interesting to see out of him.
He's had 5 podiums in the last 7 races. He stumbled into the break after crashing out at Germany in the rain, but almost everybody crashed out at Germany in the rain. 8th place at Hungary after the early contact. I think that was lap 1 where he made contact with a Ferrari. Fell down the order there. But other than that, he's been on the podium. He's taking points off of Ferrari. He's doing what he needs to do. Does Toto Wolff need 2 Lewis Hamiltons on that team right now?
I think he'd like them.
I think he signed Bottas because of the harmony factor.
Yeah.
Not because he can't fight Lewis Hamilton, but because there's just a synergy right now between Bottas and Hamilton. There's a level of respect. And right now, the talent gap between Hamilton and Bottas, when Hamilton is on, puts them in a separate race from each other, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. But right now, the Mercedes is so far clear of the other cars in general. We didn't see that the last 2 weeks because of the quirks of these racetracks, but they have enough of an advantage that they don't need to have someone nipping at Lewis's heels from the inside like we saw with Nico Rosberg, like we expect might happen if you threw Esteban Ocon in that car.
Yeah,
it's an unknown at this point.
I think that's a great point. And the one thing Bottas can do, I don't think either one of us will argue, he can qualify.
He's had a great year.
That guy can step on that loud pedal and make it happen when he has to. And so if you can keep those cars together at the front of the field, it does give you the options that you might need. You could back the field up. You could do some crazy strategy. You can find some gaps. I think you make a great point there of where Bottas's real value is to the Mercedes team, whether they want to come out and say it or not.
I was really surprised that Mercedes didn't try a 2-stop strategy from the beginning with one of the 2 cars.
From the get-go in that race.
I really wanted to see them pit Bottas and get an undercut on Leclerc and see what he can do in the dirty air. Kind of like they did at Belgium with Vettel holding up Lewis Hamilton. They had the chance to return that favor to the Scuderia on their home turf, switch Bottas to a 2-stopper. Hamilton ended up on a 2-stopper because the tires didn't last. I think they wanted him to try to make it to the end on 1 stop, but all those laps running in Charles Leclerc's wake and pushing destroyed his tires, ended up going to a 2-stopper. But I think if you had split the strategy, and I'm just suggesting it would have been Bottas because Hamilton was in front of Bottas and closer to Leclerc, just naturally pressuring him from the start of the race, that it would have made more sense to pit Bottas. Maybe 3 or 4 laps early, get an undercut, get him in the lead, and just kind of put a pincer move on him like they did to Kimi Räikkönen last year.
Couple other bits of news from the Formula One grid. Hopefully this isn't in your Morse code report, but Rich Energy is no longer going to be on the Haas cars. They have come to an agreement. The Rich Energy folks, if you'll remember, they went through all sorts of different things. Their logo they were being sued for. Then their CEO went all rogue, said they were getting rid of the team because the team wasn't performing. Then they kicked him out, and the board of directors said, no, we're good here. And the board now saying, look, we're just not in a place to make this happen. We enjoyed the relationship, but we got to get our stuff straightened out, and we need to go a different direction. They got the buyout on the car, so the colors will stay on the Haas cars, but Rich Energy coming off, the end of this saga finally over. And I think the Williams team and a few others that they were courting to possibly be on their cars are probably breathing a sigh of relief that they didn't go down that road. But at least this nightmare is over for Haas, even though the one on the racetrack continues.
I don't know if it was a nightmare, but it was certainly a fever dream.
Yeah.
None of it made sense. It was, you wake up from this and you're like, what did I eat before I went to bed to make me have this weird dream where some strange bearded man showed up with a company no one's ever heard of that has $16 in their bank account and takes over an F1 team, and then all the stuff you just described. It was... It's probably the most memorable part of this season for Haas, and that's sad on all fronts.
Definitely.
I'm kind of glad it's over. It was a distraction. It was silly. The whole thing smelled funny from the beginning. Mm-hmm. I'm glad it's over. Let's hit it with some Lysol and move on.
Last thing I have on the Formula One side is the Williams. I want to talk about how they perceived to be a little bit better the last couple races. George Russell had a great run, but Claire Williams came out this week and said that based on the poor performance they had in 2018, the company actually lost 16.8 million, I'm going to say pounds. I think that's what this sign is on the English side. I mean, this was a team that we always talked about was never financially in bad shape. I mean, they had pay for drivers. They had sponsors on it, probably not at the level you would want, but still they had money coming into the team and the performance wasn't there. Man, to lose $16.8 million, I know when you start talking about $80 million, $150 million, $250 million deals, I mean, that's got to hurt a little bit.
Absolutely, especially that's about 2 Sergei Sorokins worth of income right there. So that's not good news for Williams.
Do we feel like there's some light? George Russell felt like they were a little bit more competitive than even he thought they'd be. Like, he started up front because of the grid penalties, but he kind of stayed there all day.
They're still going to finish 10th in the Constructors, and that's not good news for them financially, but at least the car is getting better. He finished in front of Kimi Räikkönen, who had a damaged floor, who had a drive-through penalty and all that stuff, but he still finished in front of him. The car is less hopeless. Yeah. I think that's the nicest thing you can say about Williams right now, financially and performance-wise, is they are looking less hopeless. They need that trend to continue. Tony, want to talk to you about Formula 3 briefly.
I got that.
How about that crash in, what was that, practice or qualifying? Alex Peroni, the Australian driver. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely a YouTube-worthy event. They had to actually delay the start of Formula One qualifying because they decided to remove the dangerous curb placed on the outside of the parabolica that basically was a Mario Kart ramp into the catch fence.
Nuts.
He did 2 full revolutions, a nice tight Tom Brady spiral from that car as he took off through the air. Luckily, he was A-OK. Thankfully, the halo did its job because the car landed on top of the tire barrier upside down doing 2.5 revolutions. What kind of an asinine move was it to put that curb out there in the first place?
Well, I don't think they ever thought a car would launch, but as we've said in many forms of auto racing, wherever you don't put a safer barrier or some type of safety thing, a race car will find its way to hit it.
Yeah.
It just will.
It was there as a deterrent to keep people from running wide in the parabolica and gaining an advantage. I don't see why we can't just put a 5-foot wide strip of grass right there that'll be self-penalizing.
I'll tell you what, a lot of things went his way in this crash. Number one, usually in any type of car, the last thing you want to do is get into a catch fence. In this case, with the amount of height that car had, the fact that he was able to land on the top of the fence, kind of into the fence and on top of it,
onto
and
the
kind of
tires even,
and then kind of cradle its way down into the tires was good for him. The fact that he had the halo, had it hit the other way, it didn't. It kind of hit with the bottom front and then kind of turned over into that. The halo probably was a really big benefactor. We know it was a huge factor in the crash at Spa, helping those. And by the way, Correa, our prayers still go out to him. The last I saw, he was still in a medically induced coma to try to get those leg injuries and stuff healed. So we're still praying for those that were injured in that Spa crash. But
I think it was respiratory failure, actually, just because of the force of the impact, the belts on your chest and the contusions it can cause. I believe that's the current concern, despite the fact that he does have, from all reports, a pair of broken legs and also a back injury that he's dealing with.
Praying for all those that were involved in that race, and for the Formula 2 family to have two scary race wrecks in a row, it's tough out there. But yeah, he was thankful that everything kind of went right on that. I mean, if there hadn't have been a fence there and he'd have come down from what had to have been, how high do you think that was in the air?
It was
30 feet?
20, 30 feet, easily.
If that had come straight down onto the ground?
Tony,
I went to Hockenheim. And then you had safety workers underneath there where he hit.
I went to Hockenheim in 2012 for the race weekend. And in the GP3 race in front of me, you know that like almost kind of turn one, like how it's just barely a bend where Bottas and Hamilton both had their offs this year? There was a GP3 car that went off the track and went over the curb and came down from just hitting the curb. Car stopped, and then the ambulance came out, and then they took him off on a stretcher with a fractured back from going over a car. There is, from just the curb in that car.
Yeah.
There is no give in these cars. I think that's a good observation, that he was extremely lucky to have his blow cushioned, because these cars are not designed to be dropped.
Yeah.
They can bounce off of things and absorb that impact, but they're not supposed to be up in the air.
It reminded me a lot of the wreck that was in, was it Baku or Macau?
I thought you were going to say that Sylvester Stallone movie.
No. Do you remember? I think it was a Formula 3 race in Macau.
In the Macau Grand Prix.
And
she
launched over the corner into the building that was on the other side.
That looked like an airplane crash. She was going so fast. She, I believe, had contact that knocked her wheel off, was out of control, and just a passenger coming into a braking zone. This was in a high-speed corner at Monza this past weekend.
But still that height, just that launch.
Yeah, she just launched over the curbs and into a photo stand. It's still amazing that no one was killed in that wreck. That's
very, very thankful nothing
violent.
happened there.
What else was going on in the racing world? Formula 2 was back in action. It was a somber event since both of their races were canceled in Spa following the Antoine Hubert tragedy. In the feature race, there was a drama for our points leader, Nick de Vries. He had his qualifying lap disallowed because he didn't have enough fuel to provide a sample. I think you need a liter left after qualifying to provide a sample to the FIA should they request it.
That's cutting it close.
Yeah, he didn't have enough fuel, so he goes to the back. That's an opportunity for Nick Latifi. He could not capitalize. De Vries came flying through and finished in the third position behind Nobuharu Matsushita, who gets the victory over Luca Ghiotto. Jack Aitken would finish 8th and get reverse grid pole. The sprint race, if you got your ESPN app, I suggest you watch the sprint race. It was really exciting. It was a 3-car fight for the victory. Jack Aitken got such a good launch. Tony, second place, third place, bogged down. He had such a lead going into the first chicane that he was weaving, trying to put heat into his tires from the race lead.
Eric, we've heard his name quite a bit. Who's he racing for, and kind of where is he in any of the academies? Do you know?
I believe he's a McLaren junior, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to check. But he is a young British driver, so that would check out. And he is driving an orange race car that looks quite a bit like the McLaren, but sometimes those alliances can be misleading if you go just on the paint
Sorry to
scheme.
put you on the spot.
No, I believe he's a McLaren junior. But he had a strong race. Our buddy Jordan King had a great fight for the lead. They traded the lead a few times, but Jack was able to get the better of him on a safety car restart, retake the lead from Jack Aitken. Callum Ilott threw his hat into the ring. He's Juan Manuel Correa's teammate, running only one car at that organization with Correa still in the hospital. He was able to fight his way up to second, only to throw it away on the final lap. Meanwhile, Nick de Vries dodged a huge bullet. He had a giant lockup going into the first chicane so bad that he couldn't even take the escape road. He had to go through the grass because he was going too fast for the escape road, parked it, waited for everyone to come by.
What Wait, what did he do?
He parked it.
And waited?
Yeah.
To safely return onto the track. Okay, it's just
without gaining an advantage even.
I just wanted to make sure I heard that right. He didn't just say he couldn't see.
It sounds like he could be a Ferrari driver, huh?
No, he safely did it.
Yeah. He was able to rally to third place again. So 2 third-place finishes for Nick DeVries. That's going to blow the championship wide open after Latifi struggled in both races here at Monza. So now Nick DeVries leads Nicholas Latifi and Luca Ghiotto. By the way, keeping a tab on Mick Schumacher. He finished P6 from the 14th position in the sprint race. So he had a strong Sunday, though, and he recorded fastest lap.
Yeah, he needs some time.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely needs some more seasoning.
And I think he's probably going to be, when they're ready for him, that looks like it's going to be one of those alpha moves, too. You go to alpha, then you come up. It'll be the Charles Leclerc all over again.
If ever there was a rookie who was worthy of a Formula One drive at Ferrari, it was Charles Leclerc, and they still didn't put him in. You just don't see that anymore. I think Lewis Hamilton was the last rookie to get a race-winning car just off the bat, and that was in 2007. So I still think Mick Schumacher has yet to prove his mettle in terms of being in the discussion at Alfa Romeo or any other teams for that matter.
That's all. You just give the kid some time.
Yeah, if he continues to develop, I think you see a huge fall-off in performance from drivers who are successful in Formula 3 when they jump up to Formula 2 because the tire compound is so different. In Formula 3, you can really just whip those tires, and they're all sprint races. But now, when you have the feature, there's a mandatory pit stop, 2 tire compounds, and the tires are just as finicky as the F1 tires to try to turn on and make a strategy work. So you really don't see a lot of success of drivers who get thrown into Formula 2 right off the bat. It takes them a season or two to get it figured out and really kind of showcase what they've learned. So we'll see. Mick Schumacher, we'll check in with him this time next year and see if he's ready for an F1 seat.
Anything else going on?
It was a pretty quiet weekend. We're getting ready for the IndyCar finale, double points at Laguna Seca's in a couple weeks. IMSA was off. They're marching towards their series finale. I believe they've still got Laguna Seca on their calendar, and then their finale is the end of October at Petit Le Mans Road, Atlanta. That should be a real exciting
race.
Always
a fun race. Hey, one quick thing, and we'll wrap this up. We didn't really get a whole lot of time to talk about it during the race when we were watching it, but Fernando Alonso was interviewed during the practice, I think it was practice 3 at Monza, and was asked several times in several different ways about returning to F1 and whether he would want to and what he's looking at and if it's a possibility. We kind of joked because we briefly talked about it during the race that he said so much without saying anything at all. But you're a huge Fernando Alonso fan. What are your thoughts on what he looks? Obviously, he wants to do the Indy 500. He talked about that kind of unfinished business, but do you think we'll see him in a car next year?
Unlikely. We know the 2 McLaren seats are spoken for. I think the only place that you would see him turn up is Ferrari, unless there's an even bigger shock where Lewis Hamilton jumps to Ferrari and opens up a Mercedes seat. I think those are the only 2 situations you could see Fernando return to.
He's kind of painted himself in a box.
Yeah, he can't go to Red Bull because of his adversarial relationship with Honda. He's committed to the Indy 500, so everyone knows that if they do sign him, that they're not going to be in Monaco with their new signee. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah,
but if he can come back to McLaren a couple of years ago after the way that relationship ended, almost anything's possible. I still don't think a Honda reunion's possible, but I'd say just about anything else. Never say never, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, there just aren't any seats open for him, really, when you think about it.
Well, if
you're not
Vettel
going to Williams,
is shown the door, who is worthy of a Ferrari seat right now? They'd have to go poach someone like Danny Ricciardo, and he's getting paid. Please, a third time.
Kimi is a number 2.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Come on, it's the Danny Kvyat model.
I think they're going to be looking at, could we get Alonso? Could we pry Danny Ricciardo out of his contract?
God, do you know how much Ferrari stuff you would sell if Alonso was back in a Ferrari again?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Either that or everybody just break it all out of the closet.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to happen. Ferrari's got to figure out what's going to happen with Sebastian Vettel. That's the next key silly season piece, is what happens there.
It's amazing to me how many seats are already locked up. I mean, when you think about it, Racing Point locked up. McLaren locked up. Mercedes locked up. Ferrari, as far as we know, locked up. I mean,
Renault's locked up too.
Renault's
with
locked
Ricciardo
up.
and Ocon.
So you've got Toro Rosso, you've got Haas, and you've got Williams really as your only options. I guess Alpha, but he ain't gonna. Again, if he didn't like driving the McLaren, he's not gonna like driving any of those other cars either. So
No, he's only
it would
gonna come
have to
back
be him just wanting to be back in Formula One to be in Formula One, and I don't get that impression from him.
No, certainly not. I don't think we'll see it. So Tony, we got a couple weeks before F1 resumes with Singapore.
Yep.
We'll have something up our sleeve for next week. We'll see if we can get somebody in here to chat with us.
Always do. It's a lot of fun. Eric, thanks so much for joining us as always. And again, thanks to everybody that joined us on the live show. It was so much fun, and we appreciate you stopping by. Don't forget to subscribe. Leave us a comment. We love that. And for Eric Morse, I'm Tony Rizzuti. We'll talk to you next time on American Racing Snobs.